All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this work session on assembly of proposed budget amendments FY20 to order. Let's start with the introductions on this side.
Forrest Dunbar.
Felix Rivera.
Austin Quinn Davison. Meg Salatel.
Pete Peterson.
Red Dyson.
Suzanne LaFrance.
John Weddleton.
Okay, so I'm going to give a short preface to the meeting. So first, just want to remind my colleagues that the role for us today is to ask clarifying questions, ensure comprehension, and to scrutinize funding sources if you so want to. I think debating the intent of an amendment should be left for the floor on Tuesday. Second, as I've talked with the administration, the current understanding is that the S version of the budget will be sent to us and the public on Monday, hopefully, if not, hopefully at the latest Tuesday morning. At that time, we'll see if our amendments were incorporated in the S version or not. So, questions on that before we dive in? Okay, so let's start. Amendment number 1. So this is one of my amendments. It is in addition of $5,000 to the Federation, if we could fix that, Federation of Community Councils contract to pay for needed insurance to allow charter-created community councils to meet. This isn't really an amendment. I just put it in here just to let people know because this increase will be absorbed into the existing Assembly Department's budget. So we're not amending the budget. So in April, I made it clear to the FCC that they need to find a way to make this work, this $10,000 insurance question work on their own. The message didn't sink in, and I was asked to include a whole $10,000 in the budget, which Assembly members will remember that we included this in April in our first quarter. So I initially said no, that we're not going to include any in the budget, but I guess my heart grew 2 sizes, and I compromised to a 50-50 position where we will pay for $5,000 and the FCC out of savings will pay for $5,000. There are alternative solutions being worked on to figure out to make sure we're not in the same position again, but unfortunately none of those were able to be hashed out in time for this budget. With that, that's my amendment. I think Mr. Hansen had a question. Yeah. Mr. Weddleton.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess the question is 10,000 still what they expect to be for the insurance? And
Yes.
What is their overall budget? Has it changed in 10 years?
85,000, so it's up now with the 10,000, 95,000, and no, it hasn't changed. Yeah, Mr. Dunbar.
Can you remind me, do they do any of their own fundraising or do they have any other sources besides us?
So this is what I asked them to do, was to be creative, and they didn't. Yeah, Miss Quinn Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mrs. Chair. Is there a plan for beyond this year? Like, do we start saying, we asked, and how do you think we should approach that?
So they know that I already asked them to figure it out once. They didn't. And so I made it clear to them that they need to figure it out and that they should expect absolutely $0, and that my heart will not grow 2 sizes again next year. Mr. Constant.
So they have, as I understand it, for each community council, a small amount of money that is allotted for communications or for other services to the councils.
Yes.
And I know in my experience in all the years of the community council that I worked in, all the 5 of my downtown councils never saw a dime of that. And so my question is, are those funds going directly to the councils or not? Because 10,000, 40 councils, roughly 38 now, I think, it's $250 each. And that certainly...
No, so go ahead and then
That is in excess of the amount that is needed here. And if the funds are being used for other priorities of the council that aren't directly for the council-related commitment, then it seems like there's a flexible tool there.
So each council has the opportunity to get $75 annually for communications and outreach. It has to be proactive. So Mark Butler, the director, he sends out notices to the community councils, hey, do $75, if you want it, come get it. You have to let us know why you want it. And from my understanding, most of the community councils don't bother because what can you do with $75?
And so that adds up to $3,000, which is nearly $5,000, which then if you were to divide that difference by 40, each council pitches in another $40 and they've met their goal. So just a thought.
Sure. Yeah, I could talk with the Federation and see if they maybe do other things with that money in their
I'm sure
budget.
they do.
But yeah, I can have that conversation and look at maybe reducing this to 2,000 instead of 5,000, or some
From the funds
in the
that they
middle.
already have.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yep. Any other questions on this one? Okay, seeing none, then we'll move on to amendment number 2. Ms. Salazar.
Yes, Mr. Chair, coming. This amendment proposes to move $100,000 to a sole source contract with the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness as part of the MIT budget that's proposed through the police department. I've laid out the specifics. This is really to work on that outreach coordination between the timely notice camps and abatement, and also to track some data specifically around the effectiveness of our outreach efforts, and to also, excuse me, make sure that this process is feeding in as seamlessly as possible with the coordinated entry strategy that the coalition is bringing online.
Can we ask questions really, please?
Yeah.
You guys do administration too, right?
Yeah, if you have clarifying or want to ensure comprehension, yes. So Mr. Dovar.
So from anyone from the administration, what impact, and so I guess, I'm not quite understanding, Ms. Alatow, would this fund a person that would be with the MIT as they go out?
This would fund a $100,000 contract for the coalition to do this work. So we would expect MIT and them to work together to go, so that the coalition would coordinate people going out.
Okay, so it's not a replacement for exactly what MIT is doing. So my question is, for the administration, what impact would a $100,000 cut to MIT have, practically speaking?
Through the chair, I think we have to get to some specifics with the people who are closer to the mobile intervention team project itself, but it would be a direct cut out of their budget, prevent us from hiring probably one position. We can give you some more specifics.
Bill, you're gonna have to come up and
Well, no,
talk
I mean,
closer. I don't think we're gonna pick that up on the mic.
I'm gonna need a much more thorough answer if this is, you know, I think the purpose of this work session in part is so we don't go past midnight on Tuesday.
Yep.
And so I'm just gonna need a much more thorough answer of that on Tuesday night.
So if I may, Mr. Chair,
Sure.
I've been discussing this with the administration through Ms. Browse. I would say that at this point, they were hoping to see this amendment use this as a municipal position housed at the coalition, to provide maximum flexibility, however, and to maximize the resources at the coalition. I think giving a $100,000 grant to let them then disperse amongst some of their existing staff members and also possibly hire a staff member to do this work that they are already working on would be much more effective and a higher utilization of the dollars. We should get more impact from that.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
I got two little questions. One is, I don't quite understand the wording here. So going four lines down, to do outreach coordination between the time of noticing the camp and being notified by the camp MIT. Is that one event?
Yes,
Say when they're noticed.
that's correct. That was
Okay, so
one event.
So they notice, now this kicks in, this person. Okay. So, and this is someone from the coalition, Jasmine's team?
Yes, that's
group.
correct.
Do they have staff doing any of this stuff now? Or is this-
They have staff coordinating with with the community service providers to get folks in touch, and then this would be something that and I've talked with the coalition about this, that once they got notice, they would use someone to disseminate out to the right kind of service provider. Hey, there's these folks who've been noticed that their camp is paying abatement. Can we make these contacts? Because they're already working with service providers to do this kind of work. But they're not getting notice from us right
You know,
now.
and I say I'm confused because my assumption is that was already being done. Is that MIT was a cop or two, and we had a social worker, and they went out and they made these contacts, and they added them to the point of the list of names. We have all their names, and all this has been done for the last 3 years. And you're bursting my bubble and saying no.
Yeah, Mr. Welton, I think that was the intent, but I don't think that's been the operation. I have went out on camp abatement, and CAT team handed cards out and said you should go to the Mountain View Library on Thursday to do coordinated entry. And there, we've heard through the coalition and the health department that the information flow is not happening so that those outreach contacts are happening. And when we ask for the data about those outreach contacts, it doesn't exist. I mean, there's, in terms of that handoff during that camping period. Now, there are contacts being made by MIT, but they are not necessarily related to camp abatement. They also deal with 880 call volumes and other things. This really puts, in my mind, the subject matter experts who are best suited to do this work most effectively and efficiently.
Okay. So where does money for coalition and homelessness come from now? Where do they, what funds are operating?
I'm not sure I know 100%. They, I don't know that we fund them much.
I'm sure they get a lot of
State and federal grants, I think, and Rasmussen, yeah.
But they haven't prioritized this cash amongst their funding, where they would be doing it. Because there's nothing for anything.
This
Joining
embeds,
MIT.
this embeds their work within our MIT process, which I think is a critical missing link to make it effective. I think where we're not getting effectiveness is we're not getting this warm handoff by people who have social work skills or the right social service agencies to folks who are in camps to hopefully get them to shelter and hook them with the appropriate services. I think this is a missing link.
No, well, it appears to be, and I'm distressed to hear. I thought that was happening. That was very bad. It wasn't. But I want them to pay for it through the regular. That's what we can help with it. But that's okay. I appreciate the highlights because that what you're describing needs to happen. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Van Davidson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wilson asked most of my question, those similar ones. So in terms of the administration, when you've been working with Ms. Browse, so she's not here today, correct? So when will we hear what you all think about this from the administration?
Through the chair, we can get you an answer probably by Monday.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm wondering if the Equity Coalition for Homelessness, do they have people with the training needed to do this task? Are we going to have to train them? I'm not that familiar with who all is in the Coalition for Homelessness, so I just wondering.
They do not believe that we need to train them. What they do need is the direct municipal contact so they know which camps are prioritized for abatement so they can go out and be in the right place at the right time. They will really be the point where if they get that information, they will work with their service provider network to get the right kind of service provider out to the right type of person at the right time. Because they have a network of service providers that are members of their coalition, whether it's mental health, alcohol, I mean, all kinds of things. So they have much broader, they have a greater breadth than what the municipality has in-house in terms of contacts with those agencies. And they do regularly make those kind of contacts for individuals, but they don't necessarily hook in with them at the point of camp abatement.
And so they'd be going out there on their own with no APD officers or security with them? I mean, I could see a potential physical confrontation possibly.
In my mind, this shouldn't be so prescriptive as to the procedures. I would hope that MIT, CAP, and the coalition would figure out the best operating procedure to move forward that utilizes all of their resources to the highest and best.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any further questions on this one. Moving on to Amendment 15. Ms. Alato.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment is to put money into the Anchorage Health Department in the amount of $2,368,750 to operationalize our shelter capacity for 150 individuals. We typically only fund during winter months, plus bring online shelter capacity during the day for 150 individuals in 2 locations. I've put quite a narrative with this. I think the justification for this is because we have had significant work done to increase public safety within the municipality. This body has instituted pretty broad cuts in the past to increase public safety. I think we don't necessarily hear from the public that they feel public safety has improved as much as it may. Really have improved, and a lot of that is around visible homelessness and homelessness. And there's a lot of frustration also around camps and the whack-a-mole approach we kind of have with camps going and then popping back up. This should be enough shelter capacity to allow for year-round abatement, defray the need to have additional overflow emergency shelter capacity in the winter, and then also give folks a place to go during the day. It does utilize the $250,000 that was already in the health department budget as a private shelter match, and then suggests an across-the-board cut at 0.858%, except for in certain areas which include the APD and AFD. And I've included bed count determinations. That was the handout I just gave. I worked with the coalition to get where we're at with and I find that the first chart there is utilization rate, but really the back chart shows where it's really that 150 seasonal beds. And then I also attached the emergency declaration from last summer. I don't believe that we have any reason to suspect that this summer will be any different from last summer unless we make a change. And while this is a significant investment, I think it's one that will go a long way to having real substantial change towards our goals. We can shelter individuals, we know where they're at, we can deliver the services, and we can start to get out of some of the loop or we've been stuck in.
Thank you. Mr. Constant?
Thanks. It's a bold proposal. It's a proposal for sure that we recognize the need. The emergency declaration that came up clearly demonstrates, and we didn't invest to solve the problem through the emergency declaration. We put a patch down over the cracks in the cement to get going forward. And so it's a very interesting item to contemplate. It would really change the dynamics in our community if we were to do this. And I would hope that everybody spends a little time thinking about what this might mean if we were to take this step. As was mentioned, in the last 5 years, this administration has worked very diligently to increase public safety by taking those decrements of services across the board to fund the police and to make sure we have enough. And so this would be following that model, but it would be targeting that to the clearest emergency that we've had in the last 6 months to a year. It's certainly bold as heck, and I appreciate the mover for putting forward.
Thank you. Mr. Wells.
A couple of questions. How legitimate is this dollar amount? I mean, is this?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Wilton. It is legitimate. It is what California and Alaska use for a per person per night amount, $25 a head. So it was straight math, $25 times 150 individuals times 365 days for a year.
I guess I'm going to necessarily be placed in this, but you know what I've seen walking around is you have a lot of places have a low barrier and high barrier. And some people, doesn't matter if the bed's there. I'm not going there because a bunch of drunks and alcoholics are crazy people. But I got this one here, and they're not drinking, they're not on drugs, and I feel okay. I'm comfortable there. I mean, I suppose that's not for your budget amendment, but I would contemplate that were we to set up a separate shelter.
Mr. Relevant, if I may, and that's why I included the bed capacities there. We really are, the gap is the $150 or 150 individuals that use the overflow, as well as that warming station. And so that's probably low barrier. I have talked with some of the shelter providers. If this went out as a potential RFP process, if one shelter provider ran both low barrier shelters, because you try to work the population into certain types of areas. I mean, we've been brainstorming about it. I think having the bed availability can start to get folks into places where they're more comfortable. And this is really, I would say, to stem some of the emergency, so we can get a handle on it, and then hopefully we really get folks into shelter and we work really hard, and we get them out of shelter because they've got someplace to go. We can find them, we can help them with services appropriately.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Salatel, for this proposal. I agree with a lot of what Mr. Constant said and Fred's clap as well. Do you have a sense that, from talking with providers, that folks would stay year-round? Are there people who want to be camping? Will we use these beds, I guess, is the question.
I have the sense that yes, we will use the beds, and the other thing is that if there are the beds, the camping will not be allowed. It allows us to stop the camping.
To change that dynamic.
Yes.
Within the same room. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so have we identified a location where the 150 beds will be?
I have talked with some of our private partners who have potentially identified a location. I'm not ready to make any announcements, but there are conversations about how to leverage private resources to assist on the capital side.
Ms. Salatel, one thing for me, if you could provide another backup to this that gives an Excel of what exactly, how much we're going to cut from each of the departments, I would like that, please. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next question from Ms. Zelatel. Can you talk a little bit about the timing of the funds?
The idea is to pick up where cold weather shelter or emergency cold weather shelter leaves off at the end of April, which is 150 beds. Also, it would provide time for Brother Francis for day shelter to kind of recalibrate to do day shelter there, and to give the opportunity to find the location. And then I particularly like April to April, so that we don't have, if it wasn't funded the second year, we're not turning everyone out at the end of the year. We are getting through that time, and we would typically do overnight cold weather shelter anyway, so we wouldn't be stuck with any kind of emergency appropriation or request.
And if I may follow up, does that mean then funds would not be needed until March or April?
Yes, that is correct, and this is not a first quarter budget revision because it does suggest an across the board cut, which would be very hard to do at that time.
We can't encumber 2025 to go through.
That would be a question for either our budget analyst or the administration. I would assume no, but.
Did you all hear that too?
This wouldn't encumber.
If it's April to April, it would go into
2021.
But it would not encumber. All the funds would be encumbered in 2020. They would be spent April to April.
Okay, so we would fund it in 2020.
Yes, it would be, I guess, the best analogy would, or example would be like forward funding the next 4 months for 21.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson?
Yeah, thank you. I understand that the administration has been looking at a number of pieces of real estate scattered around that would be suitable, so on and so forth. Have you had any discussion with them?
Not specifically. I do know the administration's been looking around, and I know that our private partners have been in good conversation with Robin at HLD.
Yeah, all right, thank you, and I appreciate the administration is doing that. That's classy.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further questions, we'll move on to amendment number 3. So this is an amendment offered by Mr. Peterson and I. There are 2 versions of this amendment. So version 1 was sort of let me just go back. Version 1 was crafted before I got the full lay of the land. This amendment seeks to increase the Public Transportation Department budget to add a new bus route to service Old Seward Highway and the 36th Avenue, the most popular route voted on by those who attended the Transit Talks workshops. So reviewing the backup documentation, which is 3 pages, okay, several pages later. First, you'll see a resolution from the Public Transit Advisory Board outlining some clear rationale and data on why bringing back some version of the old 36th Ave and Old Seward route is important. And then the next 2 documents you will see are summaries of the 2 rounds of transit talks which occurred and were completed by the Public Transportation Department. And it clearly shows that this route there's a big need for this route and to service Old Seward and 36th Avenue. So before I go on to the second version, the first version basically makes cuts across the board, except for a few specific departments. It's all detailed in the amendment. Mr. Peterson, did you want to add anything to version 1?
No.
Okay, then moving on to version 2. So version 2 seeks to do the same thing, but looks at 3 years of matching funds from AMATs that the Public Transit Department Director, Jamie Acton, is certain she'll be able to obtain. And having the funding in hand now is really important and preferable. And the same backup documents apply. And there's an edit on this one if we can make, Desiree. So CMAC is actually with a Q, not a C, at the end. So this one, the cuts now being reduced from 1.5 million to 250,000 are significantly less to a variety of the different departments, and I think leverages pretty significantly some federal funds for us to put a new route. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Constant.
I think you just answered my question. It's not both, it's one or the other. And so one is a substantial municipal investment, one is matching funds.
Yes, so the first one was sort of the start of the conversation, and then the conversation evolves, and then it turned into the second one.
It's not both of them, thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Mr. Dunbar.
Do you intend to introduce the 1.5 million?
I do not.
Okay.
No. Yeah. Mr. Weddleton. Yeah, I'll get you.
You know, it's a surprise to me. I had been working on the assumption that we were getting all the operating funds out of AMAPs that we could in public transit. So, you know, Jamie said, obviously that's not the case. So it makes me think, oh, how much more can we get?
It's not that it's not the case. She has been talking with AMATs and with Craig Lyons, and every year what happens is, and you probably know this better than all of us, there are projects that don't get funded and then they get swept into the transit budget. And so there's an expectation, and I think there was a attachment that I think's in here, Desiree?
It is in one of the.
Here we go. So the highlighted, a little difficult to see, but the highlighted portions on CMQ 447, that money, the expectation is that that would be swept into transit to pay for this. And so Jamie's been talking pretty extensively with AMATs, and there is expectation that a big project's not going to get funded that's going to allow this to be swept in.
Okay, because AMATs is a lot about building stuff and buses, buying bus, capital expenditures, and not operating. So this, I guess, the leading question for me, you're operating the Navy, is how much more can we get from AMATs for operating? Because I'd say if there's a lot more, we should maximize all of it. I mean, this is one piece, but well, you're in touch with her. Why don't you ask her?
Sure.
How much more can we get?
Sure. Mr. Dyson.
Question and comment, is this route, will it go all the way to UMet, Providence?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what they're envisioning for the new route. I don't even know if they have a suggested plan for it. They just know that the need, and actually they probably do have a route mapped out for it, but the need is along Old Seward and 36. I don't know if it goes all the way to Providence. So.
Yeah, and I would like to know that, and getting to the hospitals and all that stuff, is disproportionately important. When you guys saw me, the lady that was there who made it dramatic, I gave her a ride home, skipped part of our meeting, and I didn't make a mistake, but I gave her my card and said, call me, I'll take you to appointments. Already got a call, interviewed, live closer, and would like to join that pool. You know, and she can get in and out of her car and up the stairs to her apartment. The walker she uses when she goes longer distance. Those are, you know, woe unto us if we aren't looking out for folks in that kind of a situation. So I'll be looking for you to give me contact information if you're. It's not an Uber thing. There's no reason worry.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Weddleton asked my question.
Okay. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, and I think I would concur that we talk about the route going through the hospital because that serves as the university and the hospital, and we've heard a number of people in our public testimony, several, talking about access to medical care. And I would just point to the highlighted text that I can barely read. I should get my glasses. It does say that it's replacement and potential operational assistance of the public transportation department. And so the line item in the table already identifies operational funds. And the number there is $2 million. I don't know, that might begin to answer the question you're looking at, Mr. Wellington. It's in this separate handout. It's like this that you can barely read and you need a magnifying glass.
Typical AMAS.
Yeah, exactly. This is when public process at its finest. And so, but if you look at the bottom large table there, it's a highlighted section. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This would also stop at the USAC library. We've heard testimony from people who told us, including Mary Jo that runs the library, that they think they would have more patrons if they had a bus stop right there at the library. And so that would partially solve that problem. And it also solves the problem of going down Old Seward Highway, especially in the wintertime when there's no sidewalks for people to walk on, and they're walking and pushing themselves in wheelchairs down the side of the road with ice. It's not a real good situation. So I think this solves the public safety situation and also helps the library maybe get back up to their record number of patrons, which would be good.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no further questions on this one, we'll go forward to number 4, another one of mine. So this amendment seeks to increase the Assembly Department budget, which that can be changed, to administer a grant through the United Way of Anchorage to scale up work done through the Community Plus schools and Back on Track programs, which targets students who have high recent scores to assist them to be successful in school. So to review some of the support documents, first there is a background provided outline by the partners that I'm working on this with, which include United Way and the school district, and other partners. So this outline reminds us about ACEs, and we got a work session about this some weeks ago, or adverse childhood experiences, Fred, and the negative effects of high ACEs scores have on students in ASD. Lastly, the outline delves into the 2 programs on the second page and the effects that they have to combat ACEs. The remaining 3 backup documents detail additional metrics on the efficacy of the Back on Track and Community Plus schools programs. And there was a email that I'll read into the record from Star Marset. I want to express the ASD board support for expanding the Core Plus program for our students. This is a wonderfully successful program that transforms lives of our most at-risk young people in terms of the trauma they have and continue to experience. The personal connections and support the programs offer is pivotal to their success. The fact that the program already exists makes it easy to scale up. I appreciate the Assembly's interest in addressing the serious social and emotional issues our students face, and this is a great way to channel supplemental funding into our schools. That's all I have. So with that, I'll start with questions. Mr. Constant.
A couple of questions. We asked the health department what this would do to their programs, first question, because they're the ones that are hardest hit in the cuts. And I'm not clear what this language means. Budget to administer a grant through the United Way. So, is there a larger grant that this would be helping to administer?
So, as you can see from the so page, the second page of is labeled page 17 at the bottom of the proposal. It talks about 825,000 has been secured, leaving, it's a big need. So we're really talking about needing a small portion of that, 2.475 million of the need. The remaining talk about what the total need is. So,
So I different question.
Sure.
So what it states there is to administer a grant, and I'm trying to understand what the administering of a grant would be. Are we talking about offering a grant to the United Way to use on their purpose, or we're going to spend $250,000 to administer a grant?
So it would be I think it's the first one, right? It would be going to United Way specifically for the purpose of these programs.
We're not administering, we're just giving them.
Right.
We're granting them.
That's it. Because there's a fuzzy language there, I want
Sure.
to make sure we're really crystal clear what that means. It would be to increase the Assembly Department's budget to offer a grant or to provide a grant to the United Way. That language should be clear.
Sure.
Excuse me, on that point, I would say grant to the end users through what it is a pass-through grant.
And I don't understand the mechanics of how it works. That may or may not be the case, but.
I think it is the case, and it's a legitimate question.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. And for our purposes, we're not giving it to administer something. It's something else.
And it's not the United Way, it's for the end user.
Thank you. I'll make that note. Ms. Quinn Davids.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like the idea. I'm concerned about the taking funding from the WIC program manager, just because I think they often serve a lot of the same people. And so, can you talk about that?
Sure.
And then also, can you talk about when it just has the amounts of the travel and supplies budget? Could you please provide percentages? Because it's hard for me
Yes.
to know how much that really is.
Yeah, so I had another version of this that had all of those numbers, but then it looked really weird
Okay.
and very confusing. So I do have my originals that have all of those numbers. But specific, and I want to underscore this point for all of my amendments, except for the ones that do percent cuts, that they are all proposed increases. So I am not cutting a position because the position does not exist. So what this is I am proposing switching the funding from a position that the health department wants to exist and putting it into this. You would have to ask the administration of the health department specifically what the ramifications would be for them.
Bill, do you want to speak to that?
Or get back to us.
I think we have to get back to you. So
Okay.
we're responding to a lot of these in real time, and we'll try to get better information about what the various impacts of these are.
Okay, thanks.
And then, so specific to, I mean, I can go down the list for some of these, or do you have a specific question?
Oh, my specific question was about the percentage of the travel and supplies budgets rather than just the hard numbers.
Sure. So, and again, these are proposed increases, right? So I'm not cutting
Oh,
what's.
these are all
It's all, yeah,
increases.
and it says it in there, right? They're all proposed increases, right? So
Yeah,
that's what
it does
I'm.
say that.
Yep.
Okay.
And so
Yeah.
if you want me to tell you what the whole proposed increase is, I will let you know. So as an example, right, the IT travel budget, the total proposed increase for the IT travel budget is $28,772, and so I'm proposing cutting 17,500 of it.
That's supplies, but,
So, yeah, sorry.
yeah, no,
It's
no.
even
it's
confusing.
No
for me
worries,
reading
yeah.
this.
So travel, what was the IT travel? Probably 69.
There you go,
So
thank
you
you.
would cut 40. Can I ask the administration a question?
Mhm.
Lance, do you, or anyone, do you know if there was a specific, like, conference, or is there a specific thing we're trying to do in IT that
I
will
will
change
get back
the
to you,
way
but
we
I
do
suspect the
business?
IT travel stuff's related to the changes that they've done in their rework to support SAP stuff, so I think that's part of that. The supply piece I do not know.
Okay. Yeah, I'm more thinking the travel, that seems like a big one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And I will say, and again, this is why I brought the S version of the budget up at the beginning, that you might see some of these amendments change their funding sources after the S version of the budget is released. hard to
Can
say
I-
exactly what that'll look like.
Can I ask a question about the S, since you brought that up, the S version?
Sure.
When you present that to us on Monday, will you have some sort of, I mean, I should remember from last year, but some sort of introductory, like, here's what the changes are, here's where these things are coming from, here's what we're able to provide, sort of a summary? I mean, obviously, it's a big, huge thing to absorb, so.
Yeah, our vision is that the AM support document that has where the money's coming from,
Yeah.
we'll give you a revised one of those, and any additions that are included in the administrations or changes, those will be on the bottom, and then we'll put a summary AIM that explains what has changed since the proposed.
Okay, great, thank you. And that, we can expect that by just sometime on Monday, or?
Or Tuesday morning, depends.
I think Tuesday morning, like, I work on Tuesday at another job, so I'm just worried about our ability to absorb all of those and then vote Tuesday night, so.
We will do our best to
Yeah,
get it to you as fast as we possibly can.
I know everyone has their own challenging things. I'm just wondering how we make a decision on Tuesday without, and that's not on you, that maybe means we can't really make a decision on Tuesday.
And I would push that we do, but we can argue that on the floor on Tuesday. Mr. Weddleton.
Argue that now. I was going to say Austin asked all my questions, but you missed one or two.
I missed one.
And I was just thinking offhand, so why don't we give this to ASD, let them do it, because it's kind of direct, but we can't really, we're limited to what we can send them. And then do we know, I mean, this is still another drop in the bucket to a huge thing. How many kids would this help?
Yeah, I think that's
Stay in there.
included in here as well. And sorry, I'm looking for help. So
Okay, we'll read it then. I'll find it.
there we go. So it is included in the 3-column one.
Okay.
It does talk about how many students are served. It also does talk about the unmet need, which is drastic.
Okay. No, I don't argue the need here. So, maybe one, when you're pulling from proposed increases, a lot of the things we do here is like, okay, we're really scrambling to get the money to do it for 1 year. And this is for any of our amendments. And some of these things, okay, well, 1 year would be great, even if no more are funded ever. But then some things like this, it's like, okay, you do it for 1 year, and that's good, but it's like, it's really, you want this funded year after year after year. You slowly step it up. And not just this one, but some of the others too. And if it's not sustainable, it's like we set up another homeless shelter. We have the money for 1 year. I mean, that's almost hardly worth doing, It's like, anyway, that's a conflict I have with some of this, so.
Thank you.
Chair?
Yes, Mr. Dyson.
I suggest you invite all the administration people up and sit at the table up here.
Sure, if members of the administration want to join us, there's plenty of seats. That invite has been made.
They look excited.
Sorry, did I miss someone else in the queue?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, and we definitely need to understand what that WIC program was going to do, because if we are cutting from a program that will specifically be providing basic food service needs to the very people we're trying to provide some social benefit to, it seems like food is the primary factor. A fed belly is a learning mind, and if you don't have a fed belly, all the rest of it is out the window. And so, for sure, as a cost-benefit analysis, I think it would probably cause some grief to even the requesters of this funding if they knew their funding was coming at the cost of breakfast for X number of kids.
I will say that yes, the requesters of the funding know what is being cut. They don't know, and I don't even know if I understand exactly the impact of it. But I mean, I will say that I had to make tough choices based on what we had in front of us.
I understand that, but of all of those, that's counterintuitive, and it's the biggest one.
Thank you.
And I have very broad concerns about the children who are hungry.
Thank you. And so I will also say that this is really good feedback for all of the amendments, because if we don't give this feedback that you're not going to vote on an amendment if it cuts library funding or this or that, then we don't know until we get to the floor, and then we're left scrambling if we want your support. So, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think we have to look at this as an investment in the future, because if we get more kids graduating from high school, there's a better chance that they're not going to end up unemployed or unemployable or on the streets or incarcerated. And so I think a little investment here saves a lot more money down the road. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
So I wasn't gonna offer this, but because you asked, about what I sort of will or won't vote for, that's not typically the information we gather at a work session, but it is relevant information. So I will not vote for any amendment that cuts the library. And that's a sufficient but not necessary condition. And I wouldn't vote for this because of the WIC program manager position, because what I understand that to be, and I could be mistaken, but WIC and SNAP are extremely good ways to get federal funds into the community and circulating. They're good for the immediate beneficiaries. They're also good for the economy. And I believe what this person does, and again, I could be mistaken, I don't see health department here. I think they enroll people in these programs. We are really under-enrolled. And so you cut a program like that, it's a $100,000 cut, but that might mean that we lose out on millions of dollars, or at least many hundreds of thousands of dollars of federal funding that would be flowing into Anchorage. And then obviously have a direct impact on children and families. So to me, that is a sort of deal breaker.
Thank you. Ms. Alto.
Can I ask a bit more general question, just so I understand the process a little bit more? So how do we know if a budget amendment that we're proposing will be treated as something we're requesting to be operationalized into the budget, or will only be a one-time? Because the administration proposes to operationalize things into the budget. Can the assembly do so as well, so that they would be a part of the continuation budget year over year versus a one-time funding opportunity?
You can do either, or both.
Is there language we need to use? Because I think the
You should.
impression of my colleagues is often
You
that
should.
these are all one-times. And I know that's not necessarily the case.
I think that your language should make it clear if this is a one-time expense or if a programmatic continuation expense.
But,
Ms. Medina.
Well, I was just gonna add, but it's up to the mayor's team to put together, including you, to put together that budget. We can say we want it to be a continuation budget item, but really that's up to whether you decide to do that, right?
That's in part true, but you also recognize that in the past, we've given you budgets that have had one-time and continuation expenses. So if you have a one-time buy, if you have a one-time item, you should recognize it as a one-time expense. That we don't want to assume that. And then if it's a programmatic thing, then you should let us know that, because if we're going to invest in it this year, then your thoughts are there is the expectation or intention that it would be done next year, if that's what you would like us to know.
I guess my point is just that there's no guarantee by us saying we want it to be continuation. It's still up to what you propose next year.
Correct.
But then it has to come back to us.
I know,
So
yeah.
that's the process, and I think more so along the lines of clearly stated if it's a one-time need, because then the administration next year when they're building the budget doesn't have to think about it again. And so that's, I think, an important piece of the pie.
Thank you. Yes, Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A follow-up question then to Mr. Wilbur. I know we've talked about in the past how at any time during the year the Assembly can make changes to the budget, and not just limited to this time or first quarter budget revisions. And I'm assuming that's true, that we can add one-time expenses or programmatic expenses at any time during the year as well. Is that correct?
You can do that through a supplemental appropriation.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Dyson.
Good question. The answer is no. There's no guarantee. It's firmly entrenched in our law that the legislative branch has complete control over the budget. And it's a long time fight. I think it's right for you to, when we do something, to say we anticipate it has no force of law and cannot overrule the power of the legislative branch to appropriate. And the only chance you can do that is somehow or the other you can put it, word it so that it's kind of under contract law, and you just probably saw in the papers, the state went through that, or the legislature tried to forward fund education. And in that case, courts ruled in favor of 1 year forward. You're depending on the goodwill and hope maybe even the intelligence of the administration and so on, or a different one.
Okay. Seeing no further questions on amendment number 4, we'll move on.
You know, if we're possible, from us, from the proponents, all of these flashy graphics are kind of blinding to me. I would love to see in just a simple narrative form, maybe a couple bullets of what we're being asked, what's gonna be funded, how it's gonna work. Because trying to sort through all these pages of really nicely developed infographics, I can't grasp what we're actually talking about. It's just it's loud to a point where it's visually deafening for me. So just some form of more clear communication of what we're specifically being asked to do here.
What's visually deafening?
All of these graphics that
Oh,
we're
the graphics.
referring to that are what we're supposed to be funding here. It's hard for me to grasp.
Sure. I will provide you an alternative. Yep. Okay. So then moving on to amendment number 5. Ms. LaFrance, Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Weddleton and I are putting forth this amendment to add $16,000. I don't know, Mr. Wilbur, if it's one time or something that would be continuation at this point, to the AFD Firewise Forester position. And this is a grant-funded position, April 16 through October 31st, so that leaves a gap during the winter months. And we've got one of our community councils, Rabbit Creek Community Council, has really taken the lead with the Firewise program. They've actually recently moved towards more of a emergency and resiliency focus, so that they're not only working on responses and prevention for wildland fires, but also earthquakes and all hazard readiness. So they've got some really good momentum and have a drill, an emergency, an evacuation drill for the hillside area that's planned for May, and it's really important that they continue this momentum through the winter months. That said, we've been talking with the administration, and there's some further clarification that needs to happen. It may be possible that the support is available. And Mr. Falsey, please chime in or correct me if I've got this wrong, but through the emergency management department. So we will talk some more and figure that out, but if it's not there, we have identified taking funding from the proposed budget increase to the finance department for the property tax review, exemption review positions.
Mr. Weddleton.
Just a little more background on this too. His name's not on here, but John C. has been doing this work for a long, long time. And when I was first starting with community councils, we had that first Birch Bark beetle infestation. He was involved and was one of the key people getting the hillside really motivated to clear their lot, become more fire-wise, set up the wood lots. It was amazing what happened. And we did a drill back then, and that drill, one, educated the fire department and those neighbors, but also really highlighted the entire hillside. Oh, something's going on. It's very visible, and got even more people doing work. So, you know, this investment with John C., which is a small amount here, and he gets other grant money, leveraged huge number of homeowners to clear their lots. It really made a huge difference out there. But now things have grown, the trees 15-something years later, spruce bark beetles coming back. We need to get that momentum going again. And the Rabbit Creek Community Council has done an amazing job getting across the hillside, people involved with this resilience committee, and working with John C. on this. So this is really a small amount of money that leverages a huge amount of work from homeowners.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So does John want to work year-round? Which we know. Okay.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. So we have an item on the agenda Tuesday relating to putting in emergency access roads. I'm wondering if somehow these can be paired together, because the point of the emergency access roads is for fire safety, access and egress to neighborhoods that have limited ability to move. And that is going to be actually a pretty substantial, if it passes, operational pool of funding. And so I'm wondering if we can, if this doesn't get on the ground, figure out a way to incorporate that very important element of citizen responsibility as part of that egress process, because to me they're tied together. You know, although it's beneficial to the whole community for us to take care of our properties, it's Potter Road, Potter Islands Road, and it's Bear Valley where people are going to die if we don't have clear lots
Can I address that briefly? That's possible. I think a couple things is whatever we do there would be based on bond money, really capital money, that may or may not pass. It'll be a tough one to pass in April, and we're looking for something, so it wouldn't really kick in for a while. So this could be only this year, and possibly if there's a way, because we do, with a lot of those bonds, you have the O&M costs to do it. It's a bit of a stretch. Maybe it could fit, but that wouldn't be till the following year. But I agree. I mean, it is all tied into the same issue.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Just one other comment too, that funding is needed now actually, because for the work that John C. is doing, and there's been a request for $2,000 for 2019 to continue that work in December as well. So we are also talking about ways to find that funding.
Thank you. Let's see any more questions. We'll move on to amendment number 6. Ms. Davidson, Ms. Alexander.
Okay, I guess I'm up again. So this amendment proposes to decrease the proposed APD trail officers from two positions instead of 4, and then address a number of needs, particularly around the Assembly's ability to effectively communicate with the public and get our work done, and also winter camp cleanup, which there currently isn't money in the budget for. So it's the minutes clerk public engagement position we discussed as part of the communications pillar and our priorities. That is one really where if funded, the clerk's office can then go in and do their highest and best uses amongst them and all their fantastic skills to help us communicate clearly with the public, as well as keep up on our minutes. Assembly Council Law Clerk stipend, we believe that Sadie was a great asset last summer, and we'd love to see Dean get that kind of help again. Some big legislation moved through over the summer. Assembly aides, to do an increase there so that we can get a bit more time with our aides and make them more usable. 4 hours a week is really hard to make that usable and productive. Elections coordinator, our elections are extremely important, so the one kind of speaks for itself. And finally, Parks and Rec winter camp cleanup. Right now, Parks and Rec can possibly go out. I know sometimes we contract for large camps in the winter, and we haven't budgeted for them. I think if I remember correctly, last winter there was a large camp at Top of Campbell Lake. No, sorry, in the Top of Campbell area. Sorry, and it was I believe $10,000 to clean up because we didn't get to it until it was well established, and it we didn't have a contractor with like heavy equipment to work there. So this is proactive.
And I'll just add that we talked with Brand and Nancy about this, and they could definitely use it to be doing some camp cleanup work right now.
All right, so I put myself in the queue. So a few things. So first, this amendment is, I don't want to say competing, but an alternate to a few of the other amendments that we have before us. So I guess we'll just have to have that discussion of which one goes forward. And then second is in all of my budget amendments, I looked at all the proposed increases, except for I made sure not to touch 2 of them. One was the trail safety officers, and then the second was an increase around the climate action plan. And so I don't know yet whether that's a yes or no factor for me, but that's just something to put out there. Mr. Dunbar.
So actually, I might have been reading ahead. There was which one was it? There's, going back to funding sources, there was an amendment that, actually it was the last amendment, and there are other amendments in here, that cut funding from the proposed increase to the finance department for the property tax exemption review positions. Mm-hmm. Now what I want to ask Lance is, are those positions, so those positions generate money because they go back and we found they generate millions of dollars. Those millions of dollars that they generate, are those built into the 2020 budget?
So if you reduce the positions, you reduce the revenue.
Right. So that you can't really use that as a potential funding source because you've actually reduced the amount of revenue.
Good point.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions on this one? Okay, thank you.
I mean, you can definitely think it's a bad policy idea, but.
Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regard to Parks and Rec, one of the questions that I actually had from John Rada himself was, he had, before he left, he kind of done his bit with the budget, and he had done some restructuring in his, what he thought personnel-wise, and he was paying attention to more of the camp cleanup types of needs. And so I was just wondering, is his thought in terms of where Parks and Rec needed to go, is that actually incorporated in this
It is
budget?
built in it.
Or was that again
No,
revamped?
I will confirm with Mr. Duran, but I believe it is, because one of the things he wanted to do is he wanted to start earlier and go later.
Yes.
And we're doing that in 2020. And
Okay.
I don't know if he had different timeframes in mind, but that's what we proposed.
Good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see anything else. Then moving on to Assembly, Amendment number 7, myself and Ms. LaFrance. Could you do this one, Ms. LaFrance?
Sure, Mr. Chair. So this amount is for $30,000 to fully fund the election coordinator position in the Assembly Department. And as it states on the amendment, this work is currently being done by the municipal clerk, and we've had a consultant in the past to provide assistance with that. This will fund the position so that we no longer need to do that. It will take money from the Office of Economic Community Development and also from for the IT positions. And I don't know if it's appropriate to ask if Ruth Jones wanted to add anything to that.
Thank you.
Thanks. Any questions on that one? Okay. Oh, sure, yes. Mr. Rose.
What if you don't get 30,000 bucks?
Through the chair, I'll let you know after that happens.
But we can't disenfranchise voters, period.
Well, it will not be pretty, but I will let you know if it's not funded.
And the clerk can't get political votes, so let's not push her. Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. On this one, as I read your notes here, it says 145K finances 2 positions, is that correct?
Oh, yes, that is where the money is coming from. So, yeah, 30,000 out of that.
And so 72,000 per person, covers wages, benefits, and all that kind of stuff? That's a good number?
That's, it's a question for the administration.
Mr. Dyson, it's for a half a year for 2 people. It's to start in June.
Okay, all right. I did well in math. All right, that's important to know.
They'd have to start in July instead.
Or we would get.
If I might.
Yes, Mr. Peterson.
Phil, you know, Ms. Jones wanted to stay neutral in this, so I'll step up and say that she worked way too many hours during the election last year. And the last thing we want to do is burn an outstanding clerk out by overworking her. So I think this position is good.
Mr. Cox.
I think since we're still back on the 7th one, I thought this was one that the administration said that they had already addressed somewhere. I mean, they've be mistaken, but as I heard from Ms. Rouse, who's here, this position was addressed somewhere, or will be.
I don't want to make any assumptions on what's going to be included in the escrow or not.
I understand that.
Yep.
This is a baseline issue.
Thanks. Okay, seeing no other questions, move on to amendment number 8, and I'll cover this one. So this is a $100,000 increase in the Assembly Department Municipal Clerk's Office, specifically regarding vote by mail. So we've had an increase in the number of voters, but we haven't had an increase in the expense to run our election, specifically for postage or printing. And we all know that vote by mail is expensive in that fashion. So this takes from the Finance Department proposed positions, which I imagine that will probably, a lot of us will be changing that over the weekend, which is why we do this. And so that's as it's written right now. Yes, Ms. Salatel.
what happens if we don't fund this and we just need the money to mail the ballots to make the election happen?
Do you want to talk about that, or I could?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. And the 235,000 number is not a hard and fast number at this point. And we've just, some of you may have gotten your voter registration card in the mail. And if you didn't, then you probably need to re-register because you might have moved. So we're hoping to find out what the real number is if we get, some change in registration. And so we have to work with the state on that since voter registration is through the state. So it's kind of a moving target right now, but that's what we're estimating at this point.
And then I think sort of an additional answer is then we just run hot in that part of the budget, and hope for the best.
Okay.
But other departments sometimes do that too. Mr. Weddleton.
Okay, so just doing the math a little bit. So $100,000 for 17,000 voters is $5.88 per voter, and is that so we're spending $1.4 million for the election as a whole? Is that right?
That is correct. I think the number that I gave you after this election was about 900,000. So it's about 900,000 per election. I think $5 per package is a little high. We were short this year. I will tell you that during the mayoral election, because we were worried about having a potential mayoral runoff, we bought. Yes, we bought about 500,000 extra envelopes. So that's inners and outers, 250,000, which would have allowed us to cover that if there had been a mayoral runoff. So we had those envelopes last year. So this year we don't have any. I have 0 envelopes now. So I need 250,000 plus inners and outers. So we used up envelopes the previous year. We're going to need more this year.
You're getting about a 15% extra buffer there? Sounds like to me. You say you need 250 envelopes, 50,000 for 235,000 voters.
Well, yeah, we definitely need that buffer. We have, I believe we have 5 or 6, I'm sorry, I've forgotten, accessible vote centers. So in addition to the 235,000 we mail, we have to have stock on hand at each of those centers. Plus we have stock on hand at the election center to mail temporary ballots, replacement ballots, and other ballots from the election center.
All right. Mr. Dunbar.
Barbara, could you remind me what's currently in the budget for the election? What's currently budgeted for the 2020 election?
I'm sorry, I don't know that amount. I believe we're around, we spent about 900,000. I think Desiree can check it for you right away.
So we sort of did this back in the envelope calculation was 1.4 million, but I don't think that's what we have budgeted, right? We budgeted considerably less.
I don't know the answer to that.
Which, my point is just that's what's necessitating the 700,000. The current budget is not 1.4 million.
I don't know the answer to that, Mr. Dunbar.
Then moving on, no further questions to amendment number 9. Do you want to take the lead on this one?
Sure, Mr. Chair. Okay, so this amendment proposes adding $140,000 to the Assembly Department budget. Currently, each Assembly member has $11,400 set aside for an aid or to use as you see fit for travel or some other combination. This amendment proposes increasing that to $24,000 per Assembly member, and this would enable members to hire aides that are actually truly part-time. And this is in response to the increasing demands on Assembly members and the difficulty in finding aides. because it's very hard to find someone who's able and willing and has the skills to work for such a small stipend for a small amount of time. There are 4 different funding sources identified, and perhaps for Mr. Dunbar's earlier point, we would revisit using the property tax exemption review positions as a source, but otherwise taking money from HR's payroll audit, proposed payroll audit positions, and the library department, but for the cleaning budget, Mr. Dunbar, hopefully that would be a deal breaker.
And cleanliness in the library paramount to you?
Well, yes, but it's, I guess it's a proposed increase, so it's a little less.
Okay, and then also from the IT position.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have anything to add to that. I think we all know the stresses that we're under and the fact that we need help. Mr. Weddleton.
I'm not using a napkin, I'm using my phone. Snap, by the way. Not back of the napkin.
It's all the user, not the tool.
So, okay, so this is, 140,000 is 13,000 per assembly member. So how do we get to 24,000 for each?
We already have money in the budget.
We
so
have
we're,
that much for us to have higher than
we have
$1,000.
Yeah. What is
What's
it?
$1,000?
$950.
Oh, okay. Shows what I've been doing. That's why we get candy, you know. Just not blowing all on it.
$900 a month in candy.
We appreciate it. Okay, seeing no more questions on this one, moving on then to amendment number 10. Ms. Kennedy.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to say this is pretty short, sweet, straightforward, but I'm learning rapidly. Things are never that way. This is a $60,000 amendment to basically pay for the land use survey that will need to happen if the Chugach Eagle River Area Cemetery is going to move forward. This is kind of the first step. So this is a very, well, the need itself, the Anchorage Memorial Cemetery says they'll be full in 5 to 10 years, so they're glad that we're looking at another location. And Chugach Eagle River Communities had this on their comprehensive plan, well, since 2007 at least, and it was recently added into the HLB development plan. So anyway, I just proposed to take $30,000 from the health department because the cemeteries are under the health department's jurisdiction, and then $30,000 from the real estate department, mostly because they'll be the ones to actually manage the contract for the land use study. And it was, as I kind of was really going through other alternative ways of funding this, it became pretty apparent that this is really the only route. Mostly because, first of all, we can't bond for a land use study, even though I know the cemetery is interested in a bond probably next year to do some repairs on some of their stone markers. Oh, okay, yeah, but not this year, not 2020, so 2021, possibly, if, but anyway. So it would have been easy to maybe tag onto that, but that's not going to happen. So, and then the other ideas was, to go through some of the tax revenue sources that we have, which would be our road board and parks and rec, but neither of those are actually appropriate jurisdictions for cemetery either. So it's kind of come down to figuring out how to take the $60,000 out of the general fund. So.
All right,
Like
everyone wants in on
I
this.
know it.
Okay, Mr. Constant.
Thanks. Did you speak with Robin? Did she say where that might come from within her budget?
No, I called her, left a message. She didn't call me back on that. So specifically, I cannot answer that.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
So this applies to this expense with sort of unique system we have in the general fund, but also other ongoing expenses like this. So there is an ongoing loud discussion in Eagle River. They want to secede from Anchorage. So my question is there a mechanism by which we can be reimbursed for this if they do leave Anchorage? And I guess I'll ask Bill Falsey as well. When we make capital investments like this, they say they're going to leave. Do we get reimbursed?
So, through the chair, I can
this wouldn't be a capital investment, so it becomes difficult to trace. I think in this instance, probably not. When a community de-assesses from the larger community, they would have to take their pro rata share of the debt service that they incurred, but I don't know that this would continue to be sticky to the Chugach River Birchwood area. The difference between this and Girdwood is, of course, Girdwood added cemeteries to their own service area powers, and then they bought their own study. So I guess if you were really trying to keep the dollars stuck to Eagle River, Chugach, Birchwood, you could do something like that, where you would say Subursa or something has voted to add cemetery powers to their own powers, and then they could do a study, and somehow that would be easier to do. But no, I'm not sure I know of a clean way to do that. Probably not a way that would cost less than the amount of money it would recoup back to general government just to keep track of the $60,000.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I might on that comment?
Sure.
Thank you. If it turns out that the Chugach Eagle River area can separate, there's going to be a lot of negotiation between what that community has invested here versus what this community has invested there, and that goes to Fred's great statement about the great divorce. How do you split the assets and the liabilities? And so that could certainly be part of that conversation at that point. But again, going back to what Mr. Falsey really said, there's really not another mechanism available to move forward with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Dyson wanted to weigh in on the previous question.
I have him in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a question and a comment to Ms. Kennedy. Is this something that could be started next year and continued the following year, like with $30,000 in 2020 work, with the understanding that's phase one? And then my comment would be along the lines of what are deal breakers, and I'm very supportive of this work because, I know it applies to the cemetery, but we've also had the Girdwood area plan that this body has supported. But for me, cuts to public safety, and I consider the Anchorage Health Department to be that third leg of the public safety stool, are ones that I can't support. So for me, that part is a deal breaker. But to the first part, could this be spaced out over 2 years?
To answer that, I don't think so. I think it's you contract with the company that will do the survey, and we just pay them whatever is contracted. My only question, though, about that is I was noticing at Girdwood, unless I'm missing another funding source to that, paid $29,000 for their survey. So why HLB was telling us that we needed 60, I'm not exactly sure why that number came out. But also, we've also been told that 70,000 might be more accurate. So anyway, I'm thinking anywhere between 30 to 60,000 could actually get us a study. So even if that is approved, that never means you have to spend that much.
Thank you. Mr. Wellesley.
I think if I could add a question and then a point on that. I think Girdwood did a bunch of the groundwork on their own prior. What you need, and you do have them in Eagle River, you need a Tommy O'Malley. Or find your Tommy O'Malleys,
Okay.
So, but a question on this, we, at some point we will need more cemetery space. It's pretty much a given. And that buying the land and setting it up is a capital expenditure. So, like our stormwater utility, we've taken out a loan to do all this, or whatever, to do stuff, and it'll be paid back when we finally do this capital expenditure. Is there a mechanism there where we do like the, like we pay for SAP? Or is this too small of an amount?
Before you respond, I really have to manage time, so if we could really make sure our comments are brief and our responses are really brief.
Very short answer. So we talked with Bound Council, and if Eagle River were to put together a plan, this much to spend it, this much to survey it, this much to buy the land, this much to build it. If you put together a capital plan and then put it on the ballot, you could bond for the whole thing. Put together a whole plan, bond for the whole thing, go do it. Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
That sounds like a good idea to me. I'm confused why the muni's even involved in cemeteries. Is it always that way for other communities? Like, why? I know that we're involved in it, but is that always the way it is? Just as a larger question.
There's a lot of requirements and restrictions.
And I agree with Suzanne. I'm not opposed to this, although it sounds like there are other better ways to do it, like bonding. So I would support that, I think, instead. But cuts to health department, I just can't support that. And then I'm wondering if a marketing campaign to encourage cremation would be cheaper. That costs you.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, and I was just going to suggest that they take a look at the Girdwood model and follow that, because it seemed like they have done a good job down there, and but it might be too apples and oranges, but what?
You still have to have the
landscaping.
Thank
Well,
you.
maybe Tommy O'Malley's interested in a part-time gig.
All right, thank you.
You could be John
Mr.
Bailey.
Dyson.
Yeah. Crystal actually made my comments. The divorce settlement would be messy, as they all are. My suggestion, I hope to get before I leave here. By the way, you all ought to support burying Eagle River people. Enabling
Not premature.
We're dying as fast as we can. To me, the optimum solution is Anchorage goes back to being a borough. Just like Girdwood be a second, third class city, let us be a first class city. So support burying.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. You know, I'm very supportive of the idea of Girdwood standing at the cemetery. I don't know that now is the time. I'm not going to see where we're to get. The question I have is, as we move forward in this conversation about what the future may bring between our whole community or sub-communities, maybe what we do need to see out of this is a vote of Eagle River Subversa or one of their community boards that owns some responsibility. When they opt in and say, this we want to do, then we double vote. If we get 2 yeses, we go. It's like the parks up on the hillside. If the community's going to invest in the parks, they have to say yes and we have to say yes. And I think that if we can come up with a mechanism that does that, we should.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
Sort of on that, and I wanted to ask Alex if he stepped out. Maybe someone else can answer it for me. This talk of a bond. So I know the municipality has to back it with full faith and credit, but which bond would it go on? And is there a way to bond where it would just apply to the Eagle River Chugiak property tax area? So we would all back it, but that would be the funding source. Is that what the bond would look like?
But that's a second step.
I thought you did have a. There's no.
There's a Chugiak Eagle River Parks and Recreation Service area. So if you contemplated the cemetery being a park or facility that arguably falls in that role, and maybe that's how you could hook it in. Girdwood is a kind of unique situation because they were sort of the remnant of the old city of Girdwood.
Yeah.
So they have sort of almost plenary kind of powers down there in their service area. So it's not easy to figure out exactly what you would hook the Chugiak Eagle River Birchwood Cemetery to, unless you created a brand new service area that was just the cemetery service area for Eagle River Chugiak Birchwood, unless you maybe could shoehorn it into either the existing Parks and Recreation Service area or add cemetery powers to the Parks and Recreation Service area. I don't know if you would need to do that or not. We can look into that question.
That to me seems like a really pretty clean solution. The whole municipality would still back it, full faith and credit, but the tax implications would remain in the Eagle River Chugiak area. And then you would essentially have done the double vote, because they would be saying, we want this, we'll put it on our property taxes. And we would say, we will support you full faith and credit. And then if this divorce does occur, it's a lot cleaner, because they paid for it, and so they get to keep it. And I'll say, this in response to Fred, my preferred solution is that we stay unified, the municipality. But I think that kind of bonding makes a lot more sense to me.
Thank you. Mr. Wells.
It would surprise me, because then what do they say? And even Girdwood, I don't think is closed, but we say, sorry, you died in Anchorage, you can't be buried in our cemetery. That would be kind of weird. And I don't know, I assume these cemeteries are open. You could die in Wasilla, and if your family's there, you go there. So everybody uses it. So far as downtown fills up, they got the land, Girdwood has land, that's where they will end up. So I wouldn't want to just dump it on.
Discount burial.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further questions, we'll move on. Amendment number 17, Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, thank you. Where is it in our package there?
Page 27.
27, yeah, so, always wanting to find, channeling Mr. Dunbar, I'm always wanting to find the obstructions in making these processes work. And so I found one where the police didn't have the clerical staff to put citations in the records. You couldn't pay online. You couldn't get an accident report, for 3 or 4 months, from it. Now I found one where our lab only does fingerprint work. The blood work and all that sort of thing, from driving when you're under the influence, all those kind of things, is taking up to 8 months to get processed. The lab work. So our prosecutors, and I've gotten this from a constituent of ours, our prosecutors are waiting to indict somebody until the lab work is almost in hand, because we have this 45-day speedy trial guidelines. So if they indict somebody right after they get busted, then that 45 days is going to run out, and there's all kinds of complications. So it's a roadblock in the situation. And you heard me trying to get a call through here with the crime lab, my partner over there, buddy. We've got to deal something with that. And Dahl tells me that he doesn't know about the 8 months, but the processing of the blood samples is really slow. So then we have people who have been cited for driving under the influence, who haven't been indicted and are back out on the roads.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Whittleson.
When I look at our department budgets, like APD, which is the huge one, I assume that he's going to allocate stuff as needed. So he's got cops arresting people for DUIs. He's going to have the staff to back that up. And what I'm seeing some of our things is, no, they don't. We have to specifically fund those. And I'm a little uncomfortable with that. And so I'd almost say, if you want to do this, is say, here's this dollar amount, pull it from APD budget. We're just saying to the chief, you got to fund this on your, fund this position. And boy, the 400 emails on the flowers.
Yeah.
Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, and I think the whole public safety thing, from the police contact on the street all the way through to the supervision after being released from prison, way under thing. When I talked to Dahl about being able just to enter the citations, he said, if you give me more people, I've got to put them in dispatch. That's where the highest priority that's affecting the people is. And he doesn't have the resources to do it. And I applaud the administration and the mayor for putting more money into administrative staff, 911, and I think in the prosecutor's office, if I remember right, and I applaud them for doing it. But it's a zero-sum game for Dahl, and I can't criticize it.
Sorry, I have to keep moving on. Were you anything, Mr. Peterson? Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And at the last Public Safety Committee meeting, Chief Dahl said that they're having a very, very difficult time finding someone with the technical capabilities to do those studies at the lab. And so even if we fund this position, we may not get someone right away, and they're going to have to recruit out of state, I believe.
Thank you.
I was just gonna say, I'd rather handle it in the first quarter because they've had a hard time finding someone, and if they're able to find someone, then do it then. I think it's a good idea. I'm not gonna cut the flowers, and I am bummed that you put this in here because now we might have to respond to 400 emails. But in general, I agree with doing that if we can get someone in the position in 2019.
Yeah, I may respond.
Yes, Mr. Johnson.
I would just offer, to your credit, sir, you did not move to eliminate all of the flowers. This is 1/10 or 1/11 part of that. And so, just to your credit, I would say that. I don't believe I'll support it, but I believe in your mission, and I understand, and it wasn't a full-blown cut, which would have definitely caused 500 or 600 people to come out of the woodwork.
Thank you. Briefly, Mr. Dyson.
Yeah, the requirements for doing the blood chemistry are orders of magnitude lower than doing the DNA analysis that have to be done on the rate gun. I don't see that being the issue. I tried to find a funding source. I just found out about this a week ago, and a funding source. I thought of cutting all of our meals and our travel budget and cutting some of our legislative aids. That would be problematic. I thought about one other source, I thought about fund balance, and I'm told, don't do there, you get your hand slapped. Been there, done that, and so on and so forth. And nothing personal, but for you all that make decisions based upon how many emails you're gonna get, or who's gonna get their knickers in a knot, is a very, very poor way to make public policy decisions. And here we got one where people are being hurt, and bad people who are busted while they were stoned, or drunk, or out on the roads because of an administrative bottleneck, a kink in the line here.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further questions, moving on. Amendment number 18, Ms. LaFrance, Ms. Davidson, Mr. Constant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This proposes moving $21,500 to the Anchorage Health Department for an urban fellow position. This is a 9-month mentorship. And we had one last year, and they were involved with producing a community assessment of substance misuse, which gave us some really good policy guidelines and good baseline data from which to move forward. We have such a tremendous substance abuse, alcohol misuse problem in our community that this is a way for the health department to fund someone who will be focused on this item. And right now this item is under discussion with the administration because the fellow positions don't start until September. It's possible it may be more appropriate for first quarter budget revisions. Mr. Davidson and I, Mr. Constant, are talking about that issue, and the administration may also consider funding additional fellow positions because it's a really great opportunity to get people with expertise and skills for a very reasonable price.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar.
I just want to give a little more clarity about what is being funded here. So the person you're referring to, was that Sarah?
Yes.
So Sarah was not a National Urban Fellow. She was an Alaska Urban Fellow. She was through the program that JKT and I brought to Anchorage.
Okay.
And I think it's a great program, and I want to fund that again. But unless she got additional funding that I wasn't aware of and had like a dual thing, she was one of our 10 Alaska Urban Fellows.
May I respond? So that could very well be an error on my part as we have been drafting versions back and forth. I added the part here recently about the National Urban Fellow verbiage, and it was my understanding it was similar to the Alaska program.
Yeah, it's a very similar idea and
we'll clear that
concept,
up.
but yeah, there's I think more red rule of the Alaska Urban Fellows, and I'm not sure about this program.
Okay.
Can I just
We may have our fellows mixed up.
Yeah, I think it's an Alaska fellow too. So I just wanted to quickly add that what Sarah, our fellow, was able to do last year is, with Natasha's help, come up with a 4 to 5 list of priority items that the Assembly could work on, code changes that would improve our response to substance abuse in this community. And one of those was the Tobacco 21 legislation, and there are a couple others. So there were real concrete things that came out of it.
Thank you. Moving on, Assembly Amendment number 19, Ms. LaFrance, Ms. Davidson, Mr. Constant.
Do either of you want to speak to that one? Okay. So this amendment proposes adding $109,000 to the Anchorage Health Department budget for a behavioral health analyst. And as we've talked about before, the department doesn't have a dedicated behavioral health professional on staff. This is something Mr. Constant has been a big proponent of, I think, since you got on the body. Although this proposal differs a little bit from previous proposals because it's for an analyst position. Not so much someone who would be on staff and doing behavioral health work. This position, the goal would be to find grants and to be fully grant funded, also focusing on issues of substance misuse and abuse and larger behavioral health issues. We tend to be focused on behavioral health in the context of the homeless population, and there's a need for a broader view, and that's why this position is different from the other positions that ended up in the budget. I don't know if co-sponsors want to add.
Yeah, I would add it briefly. This is same response. Change the title, call it whatever you want, but within the municipality, we need expertise to help the health department director to manage the ongoing behavioral health crisis that the state continues to put on the front doors and on the streets and sidewalks and parks and in front of our shelters. And So we just need an expert and wise money spent, because it'll keep people out of the loop of those criminal potholes and pits that they get trapped in.
Thank you, Ms. Salazar.
Thank you. Have the sponsors talked with any private partners on this, like the mental health trail, about possibility of working together on this position, or for them to make it operational after year one?
Through the chair, we have talked and are working with the health department, who's engaged in those conversations. And that's, first and foremost, if it can be grant funded out the door, that's definitely preferable, an idea.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, we'll move on to amendment number 11. Mr. Dunbar.
Oh, this is surprising.
Yeah. So I have 3 amendments here right in a row, and we can do them all together. Pretty simple. The first one just cuts out Academy Vanguard, clean cut. Folks prefer that. The second one takes that $4 million from Academy Vanguard and puts it to, so I reached out to the administration and said, if you had $4 million for some other road projects, what would be the highest value? What was like sort of next on the list? And you'll notice that none of them are East Anchorage. That's fine. One's West 32nd, one's 15th Avenue resurfacing, one's 48th and Cordova, and you can see there's some explanation for all of them. And then the last amendment reduces from $4 million to $1.5 million for right-of-way. In the work session we had, it sounds like that's the number to get Christian Health Associates out of that building, in addition to the $3 million we have. And then I'm still hopeful that after we buy that building, we stop this project. That we stop it at the state level, we stop it at the mini level. But we would own, I think, a pretty nice building, and we could lease it or sell it. What's that?
Homeless.
Or perhaps, I mean, that's not a crazy idea. I mean, that it could end up being a shelter of some kind. But I don't know what its highest and best use is, and that's something that the real estate department would help figure out. But we own this building, and then then it funds 2 of the other projects that I think are the most valuable. I know a little bit about the third, the 48th in Cordova. I'm a little more skeptical of that project. These 2 projects I think are unequivocally ready to go and good projects. It does increase the bond from $4 million to $4.5 million to
Thank you. Mr. Weddle.
I prefer flavor 3 here. I think it's fair and reasonable. The idea on this building is like a homeless potential thing, and that neighbors would hate it. They go ballistic over it. But on my tours this year, different places, any of these kinds of operations, substance abuse or shelters of any type, where they are managed well at their capacity, you don't have the ghetto around these buildings. I mean, even in LA, which has a horrible situation, different facilities that were well managed did not have ghetto around them. It doesn't have to be the blight that we expect here. We just are that's so far beyond its capacity. A little editorial there, but I think it is fair. We have a different route. A route could go through R&M, which would not require taking all of this. It would take some of theirs. But that is really not the reason. The other route is, if we go do this, we should do it the route that takes the Christian Health Associates building, because it solves a problem already at the intersection of Vanguard and Abbott. The R&M doesn't. It kind of creates more of a problem there. So anyway, it's the alternative to R&M is not really as good. If we're going to do it, bite the extra $2 million and do it the way the first priority way.
Can I just quickly respond to that? Just for any journalists or recording, there is no proposal to turn that building into any kind of homeless facility. That is just an idea that was floated. That would be a much longer and different discussion for people in the neighborhood.
But I'd be happy to talk to anyone about those issues.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further questions on those 3 sets, then we have another alternative. Mr. Constant, Ms. Alto.
I just get, I know how my partners work on these now. I get stuck in the hot seat. So this competence is a dangerous thing. This has a similar reduction on the Academy Vanguard piece for the $1.5 million to the right-of-way go through. It also adds, so overall it's a reduction in the $4 million amount, but adds $1.8 million for the acquisition of the Oliva properties. Right now the Oliva properties are stuck in a very convoluted study, if there will never be an end to that process, this would be an end and an out, and then we could just move on.
Sure. If there's some question about the road bonds and why this is germane, that's 3rd Avenue, that's Ingra, that is a path for the port access alternative. There are a dozen transportation reasons why it's of value. So, and I would note for the record, just that, as Ms. Elton said, I haven't been speaking for
I don't want to speak about it.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no further questions on that. Mr. Dudley.
How does the administration feel about purchasing the 11 property at this point? What would you do with it? Would you rather just, can you have a weigh in on this, please?
I think for present purposes, I'll say I am not currently aware of any road project that involves illegal properties. I know that there is some potential private party interest in acquiring that parcel. There was a study that was conducted by Agni Beck about what you might be able to do with it if you acquired it, but I don't believe there are any funds to do any of the things that you might do with it after you acquired it. So we'll take a look at it, but that's what I understand right now.
Can you kind of tell me more about the study? Who's doing this study? What?
I don't have my understanding of the study. My understanding of the study is that Rasmussen provided a grant for Robin and her team to work with Agni Beck to try to figure out the highest and best use for the illegal properties. They've interviewed different stakeholders and the like. And when this potential highest and best use is identified, then there will be a discussion about whether or not it may be purchased.
So I'll just say from my perspective, I don't think we're to the point where we're uncomfortable buying this property. So that would be, my position is that this amendment would just be, I need to know a lot more about what we exactly plan to do with that property before we buy it, sort of why we're buying it. That makes sense. And I know that you said it because it's kind of in limbo, and I get that.
No, it's more than in limbo, Mr. Chair. The issue is that is the last private property abutting the shelter environment that we've created. The environment that we've created is the highest and most complex public safety and public health threat in the state of Alaska. And it is part of the solution, whatever solution comes around.
Thank you. Mr. Weddle.
I'll be really brief, but we will solve that problem if we open a second shelter.
Agreed.
Then we won't need that problem.
I agree.
Well, we'll hash it out. All right.
Faith in your proposal.
Sure, Ms. Quinn Davis.
So, my challenge with this is every time, often when we get emails from Ron, I'll forward it to Robin and say, what's the status? And it's pretty much the same email back every time. It has been since I was elected. We're working on a study. It's like, well, when's it happening? We don't really know. We're still working. So I understand the frustration with the timeline, and I think there's some merit to this.
Thank you. All right, moving on to amendment number 20. Mr. Weddleton.
I'm sorry I have so few, but sitting by the pools in LA.
Sitting in the homeless shelters in LA.
And I just sent this to Desiree today, and I thank her for getting this out wherever she is. Thank you. Way behind schedule. And this was, I guess we asked for trail officers on the trails, but my sense is that idea of what they would do and how it would work hasn't fully gelled. I'm not opposed to that, but I don't think we're ready for it. So, and I see people picking away at that source of funding, but I think it's not inappropriate because we haven't really figured out exactly how that would work and what it would do. But I know something that would be a help with certainty, and that is expanding the community service patrol. That's what the people pick up from people on the streets south of Tudor. Safety Center. Is that what people pick up? Safety patrol. But they don't operate south of Tudor, and as we have gotten more aggressive and efficient at evading camps north of Tudor, we have more going south of Tudor, and this is a burden on now the firemen go, the AFD goes down and pick these people up. It just doesn't make sense. These are people who know how to do it right. Some way to expand this, and I thought that it was less than the amount for the 4 positions, and this is more, so we may have to rethink this a little bit. But however we land, this would be, I think, probably a money-saving thing. We have this overtime with the fire department, so I go, they're doing this stuff. They should not be doing this in South Anchorage.
Thank you. Ms. Allentown.
Thank you. Mr. Wilton, I spoke with the folks at the Safety Patrol quite extensively, went on a ride along, and there are some concerns if they go south of Tudor that getting folks back to the safety center in a reasonable fashion
or capacity issues, this may actually cause a problem before it resolves one. They spoke about the possibility of needing actually like another outpost near Diamond, particularly in the summer. I went with them in the summer during the heat wave, and when they would fill up the van, it was excruciatingly hot. So while I support this in concept, I think there's probably a little bit more logistical work to do here. If there's a way that we could expand this up to where it wouldn't go beyond their capacity with a boundary to utilize the current infrastructure, great. But I think there's some unanswered questions about that particularly.
Well, I'll be worse, because now, I mean, what does the fire department do? Do they drive them to the place, and we have a fire crew off duty to go all these people individually? That would be a real problem.
So I
We'll learn
also,
more.
thank you. So I also want to affirm that. So this was actually part of our lengthy budget priorities that we sent to the administration, and I got the same response that Ms. Salatow did. It's something that we could do, but it's going to cost more than this amendment. Mr. Constant.
Thank you. Same message that what we need if we're going to expand anywhere is a new place to take people. The place where we're taking people is all full up. And that includes the whole campus around the shelter, the jail, sleep off where that is, the safety center. There's just no more room for bodies to be driven into that tiny little piece of land. So any solution that we're going to buy into needs to be comprehensive.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Where'd you get that number, John?
That's right.
That is just the cost of 4 positions.
Oh.
4 positions.
I might though briefly, the last time we expanded service, 4 hours instead of 12 hours, it was $500,000 increment. And so it's a reasonable number to contemplate that would put another van on that would have a different set of duties. So it's reasonable.
Thanks, Chris. I don't know enough about safety patrol and how this all works, but if we're in need of another space, is that something Weddleton or others would be interested in bonding for, or is that an incredible cost? Or
I hear there's some buildings on Vanguard.
okay.
So, anyhow, that's the way we get to the answer. And that wasn't a serious response, but the point is that we would have to get there through process.
Mr. Dyson. Yeah, I get you.
Yeah, I'm pretty sympathetic on this one. I drove a guy off the road and passed out on Boniface. You know, and I don't know how close that is to the eastern boundary, but the service patrol showed up, 2 guys, empty van, not a problem. They were great. But I appreciate the fact that we're overcrowded down here and don't want to exacerbate that. Somehow there's something wrong with you. We can't take you if you passed out in the wrong place. You know, the folks that are resident down there are, in some senses, not grandfathered in. Another thing that disturbs me, and I respectfully, as I understood the administration putting 4 very expensive sworn officers on the trail patrol, the verbiage I heard was, this is what the people are demanding. Now, I would think if I was Chief Dahl and had 4 officers, put him on a lot more serious crime rather than bicycling up and down the trail. It's just a question of priority of service.
So let's chat offline about that, Mr. Dyson. Thank you. Ms. Salatow.
Thank you. John, my question would also be, what would it cost to put the second van on full time? My understanding is it's only part here right now, so that could be at least an expansion in the amount of service that's going. It may not expand the boundary, but that would be, because that's within the existing resources that they have and that they do utilize during a portion of the year.
Mr. Chair, I would offer that really what we need to look at is the boundary of the service area and how flexible that is. That might be the answer.
Thank you. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just think we should let the real estate department, Robin Ward, have her on the lookout for a facility somewhere in Midtown or South Anchorage that could be converted into a sleep-off center. Maybe it might be a situation where we should make a trade with the property we already have for property there. And so there would be no out-of-pocket expense, or minimum out-of-pocket expense.
Or amendment number 18.
Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. know, the other side of this is the fact that I can see where we're rapidly doing away with the idea of having 4 trail safety officers. And I just wanted to say that, you know, recently I had the opportunity to get a little bit bigger picture of the fact that APD has a relatively interesting and potentially be really effective drone component to APD. So we have 4 certified drone operators, and they have, I believe it's 3 drones. 2 of them are pretty basic, one's a lot more complicated, and I think they're looking into purchasing a 4th. And it just seems to me that that is something that we haven't even considered. I mean, if we had drone capability up and down our trails or wherever we want to send them, I think we could do that with, without putting it all into actual personnel. You know, they like to be in the line of sight. But anyway, I think it would be a great conversation to have, maybe from, start with the Public Safety Committee and see what APD could really do to really monitor our trails in maybe a little bit more of a high-tech way.
Thank you. Yes,
Drone big
Mr.
enough to
Constable.
pick up drunks?
No.
Hold on,
it would be a,
Mr.
it would be a
Mr. Constable.
Little claws like those things you
No,
play.
they're observation and reporting only.
So,
Thank you.
the process of authorizing the use of drones in the municipality, we went through quite a robust process that restricted the use of the drones for law enforcement and for actual crimes in action, not for the use of surveillance of just general use, because of the civil liberties implications of having drones circling looking for crime. That would be a much more in-depth conversation than it might seem on the surface. That's a pretty intense conversation.
Thank you. Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, it was my ordinance that sponsored that, so, yeah, when we specifically said you can't do patrol with drones, so, you know, I don't know, but.
It's a conversation. Interesting.
Two big brother issues.
All right. So that is it for amendments. Any process questions? It'll be a long meeting on Tuesday.
I will note that I will be in Texas on the phone.
On Tuesday?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Ms. Salazar.
Yes, I just wanted to say that we're going to have an across-the-board cut, presume that all of the additions and increases went in first, and then they go back and figure out the cut. And I wasn't as surgical as Mr. Rivera, but that's the presumption I made in the amendment.
Thank you. With that, I just want to really thank the administration and Mr. Wilbur for all the hard work that you did on the budget, and look forward to deliberation on Tuesday. All right.